Hey, a hiker on the Appalachian Trail woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of someone whispering her name directly outside the shelter mesh. Not shouting, not calling, whispering. Close enough that she could hear the breath between syllables. She was 11 miles from the nearest trailhead. The shelter log showed her as the only person who had signed in for 4 days. Her bare canister was still latched. Her shoes were still inside. Nothing had been moved. She finished her through hike. She never camped in that section again. 9 accounts, 9 different sections of the same trail. 9 people who went in prepared and came back with something they cannot explain. Let's start at the beginning. Her trail name was Sparrow. She came up with it on her first day, somewhere in Georgia, because a sparrow landed on her pack strap while she was eating lunch at a Gap and sat there long enough that she named herself after it. She never introduced herself as anything else on the trail. She signed registers as Sparrow. She wore a small patch sewn onto her hip belt that said Sparrow in marker. The letters faded from 2 weeks of rain and sweat. Nobody on the trail knew her real name. That was not unusual. A lot of thru-hikers use trail names specifically to shed whatever they were carrying before they started walking. She was 3 weeks northbound when she reached the shelter that night. It was a standard 3-sided lean-to, the kind the trail is full of through the southern Appalachians. Rough-cut wood, a wire mouse line strung across the ceiling with gear bags hanging from it like small strange fruit. A register box nailed to the far post. She arrived later than she had planned. The last stretch had been muddy and steep, and the light was already going when she came down through the rhododendron tunnel that emptied onto the shelter clearing. She signed the register. She read the last few entries, 2 days of blank space before her, then a group of 3 who had come through 4 days ago and mentioned the spring was running clear. She hung her food bag on the line, pulled off her wet gaiters, and propped her trekking poles against the post near her head. She was too tired to cook. She ate cold ramen, dry, straight from the package, the way hikers do when they stop caring about meals and start caring only about calories. She texted her emergency contact, her sister back home, before the signal dropped. The text said, "Made it to shelter. Ridge tomorrow. Phone off after this." She did not turn the phone off. She just lost signal. She was asleep before 9. Around 11, something moved in the leaves near the privy path. Heavy, slow, and unhurried. She woke up part way, listened, heard it stop. She checked the food hang without getting up. Bag still there, mouse line still taut. She had seen bear scat on the trail that afternoon, and she had seen it before on every section she had ever done. Bears moved through shelters. That was normal. She went back to sleep. The second time she woke, it was darker. The temperature had dropped. She knew without checking her watch that it was deep in the night, past midnight, the kind of hour where the woods are so quiet that quiet stops feeling like quiet and starts feeling like something else. The whisper was right outside the mesh, not through the trees, not across the clearing, right outside. The way someone would stand if they were reading the register, just at the corner of the platform. That close. It said her trail name. Said it the way she said it herself when she was reading a resupply list or checking the mileage, with the stress on the first syllable. Casual, like thinking out loud. Sparrow, just once. Then nothing. She did not move. She lay there in her sleeping bag with her hand resting on her headlamp, and she did not move for what she later estimated was 4 minutes. She counted her own breathing. She listened for a second voice, for footsteps on the gravel, for the sound of a pack being set down. None of that came. Whatever had spoken was not making any other sound. She did not call back. That part she is clear about. She thought about it. She thought about saying hello, about asking who was there, about doing the normal human thing that every instinct told her to do, and she did not do it. She does not know exactly why. She says it felt like answering would have been the wrong move in a way she could not put into words. She waited with her headlamp in her hand until the sky started going gray at the edges. When the trees became shapes instead of darkness, she sat up slowly. The clearing was empty. The privy path was empty. She swept the headlamp beam along the tree line. Nothing. She packed her bag in the gray light, methodical, not rushing. She checked the register before she left. She had signed in the night before, the last entry on the page, her handwriting, her trail name, the date. But above the line she had left blank for the next hiker, there was a new entry. She had not heard anyone approach. She had not heard the register box open. She had been awake in that shelter from 2 a.m. until dawn, listening, and she had not heard a single footstep on the gravel path. The entry was brief. No mileage listed, no destination. Just a trail name she did not recognize, and one line. Still here. She photographed it. She hiked out. She did not look back at the shelter clearing. She completed the trail 5 months later and stood on Katahdin in the rain with a group of hikers she had met in Vermont, and she says she felt exactly what she was supposed to feel. She has never gone back to that section. She's never posted the register photo online. If you ask her about it, she will tell you the story, but when she gets to the part about the whisper, she stops for a second before she continues, the way people do when they are deciding how much to say. The detail that still bothers her is not the voice. She says she can almost convince herself the voice was wind, or a dream, or the particular way sound moves through a mountain hollow at 2 a.m. She can almost do that. What she cannot explain is the handwriting, because she has looked at that photograph 100 times, and whoever wrote "Still Here" signed it with a pen she does not own. She only had one pen on that trip. It was red. The entry in the register is blue. The father's name for this account has been changed. He asked for that when he shared it on a hiking forum 2 years after it happened. His son asked for the same thing. They are not people who scare easily. They have been doing this section together every October since the son turned 18. The same 4 days on the North Carolina and Tennessee border. The same stretch of trail where the leaves come down all at once in the second week of the month, and the ridge walks go golden and quiet. They know this trail the way you know a road you have driven 1,000 times. Every gap, every creek crossing, every reliable spring. That is what makes what happened harder to dismiss. They had picked up their resupply boxes at a small hostel in a trail town 2 days in. The kind of place with a covered porch and a whiteboard listing shuttle times, and an owner who has been doing it long enough that he knows most of the regulars by trail name. He was a practical man, the owner, not the type to tell stories. He handed over the boxes, noted the weather coming in for day 3, and then said one more thing while he was turning back toward the counter. "Don't answer anything that calls your name from the other side of a creek," he said. "Just keep walking, especially at dusk." The son asked why. The owner had already gone back to sorting mail. The father laughed about it on the way out. He said it sounded like something off a ghost tour. The son wrote it in his trail journal as a joke. One of those things you note down because it seems funny at the time. They shouldered their packs and headed back into the trees. Day 2 was long and good. The kind of October day that reminds you why you do this. Cold enough for layers in the morning. Warm enough to strip down to a base layer by noon. The trail crunching underfoot with dry leaves. The ridgeline views going out for miles in every direction. They were in good spirits and moving well. By mid-afternoon, they had dropped off the ridge and were threading through a section of creek drainage, following the trail as it switchbacked down toward a crossing. The creek was running clear and fast, knee-deep at the ford, the rocks slick with algae below the waterline. They stopped on the near bank to assess. Standard stuff. They both tightened their hip belts. The son pulled out his trekking poles. The father looked at the crossing and picked his line. They were standing maybe 10 feet apart on the bank. The water sound filled the whole hollow. That was when the father heard it, his son's voice, from the far bank. The specific word his son used for him, not dad, not the father's name, but the particular shorthand the son had used since he was about 12, a single syllable that meant, "I need you to come here." Casual, relaxed, the tone of someone who has already crossed and is waiting. The father looked at the far bank. Nobody there. He looked at his son. His son was standing right beside him, 10 feet away, poles out, not looking at him, not having said a word. "Did you say something?" the father said. The son looked at him. "No." They stood there for a moment. Then the son said quietly, "I heard it too." They crossed. Neither of them said much about it. The father did not answer the voice, and he does not know exactly why. He says it just did not feel right to call back across the water, the same way it does not feel right to step into a dark room before you turn on the light. He crossed and kept walking and did not look back at the bank. The fog came in fast after that. By the time they had climbed a quarter mile up the other side of the drainage, the creek sound was already muffled behind them, and by the time they reached the ridge it was gone entirely. This section of trail has no shelter close enough to reach before dark after that crossing. They made camp in a flat spot just off the trail, pitched the tent, ate dinner quickly. The son did not take out his journal. The father did not bring up what had happened at the creek. But the son had a habit. On every trail trip since his early 20s, he recorded ambient sound on his phone. Birdsong, wind, creek noise, whatever the forest was doing. He had hours of it from previous trips. He said it helped him remember places more accurately than photographs. He had been recording at the creek crossing that afternoon. He had not thought about it until they were already in the tent, and the night had settled in around them. He played it back with his earbuds in so as not to wake his father, who was already asleep. He pulled one earbud out after about 30 seconds. He sat there in the dark for a while. Then he woke his father. The recording had the voice on it, clear enough to hear above the creek noise. The rhythm was his, the word, the inflection, the casual shorthand he had used for his father for 15 years. The voice was not his. He knew his own voice. He had heard recordings of himself before. This was not a man doing a poor imitation. The word was exactly right. The timing was exactly right. But the voice underneath it, the actual sound of it, was wrong in a way that he said he could feel but not explain. Like a photograph of your own face that has been shifted 2 degrees. Everything where it should be. Nothing quite right. They finished the section. They drove home. The father did not tell his wife about it for 3 weeks. The son did not post the recording online. He sent it to 2 people he trusted, hiking friends who knew the trail. One of them listened to it all the way through and said it was probably a sound artifact, water noise shaping itself into something recognizable. The other one listened for about 40 seconds and sent back a single message. Delete that. The father keeps the original file. He has played it for one more person since then, a friend who had been hiking the AT for 20 years and knew that section specifically. That friend listened, said nothing, and handed the phone back. He did not offer an explanation. He just said, "I wouldn't go back to that crossing." The father has not gone back. The son still does the annual trip. They reroute now, taking a different section that avoids that drainage entirely. The son says it adds almost 4 miles. He says he does not mind. What the father says bothers him most is not the recording. It is the hostile owner, because he has thought about it a lot since then. The timing of what the owner said, the specific wording of it. Don't answer anything that calls your name from the other side of a creek. Not, don't worry about strange sounds. Not, bears sometimes make odd noises. Not that creek has weird acoustics, don't answer it. As if answering was a meaningful choice. As if not answering was something you had to decide to do. He does not know how the owner knew to say that. He never went back to ask. There is a man in his early 40s who has hiked the same Pennsylvania section every August for 6 years running. He goes alone. That is the point. He has a demanding job and a full house and 11 months of noise, and every August he parks at the same trailhead, shoulders the same pack, and walks the same stretch of rocky Pennsylvania Ridge Trail for 2 nights and 3 days. He knows it well enough that he does not check his phone for miles. He knows which spring runs slow in dry summers, and which rock outcrop catches the afternoon light at the right angle for lunch. He knows the shelter, the register, the particular creak of the second board on the shelter platform. It is his trip. He owns it the way people own a ritual. He has never had a problem out there. That is something he says specifically when he tells this story. 6 years, same trail, same time of year, no problems. He is not someone who startles easily or sees things that are not there. He is the kind of person who, when he tells you something happened, you believe him, because he is already telling you the 3 most boring possible explanations before he gets to the part he cannot explain. This account surfaced in a trail club newsletter 2 years ago, then got picked up on a hiking forum where other Pennsylvania section hikers started commenting. He did not post it himself. A friend who had heard him tell it at a trail club meeting wrote it up with his permission. The details have not changed between versions. He parked at the trailhead on a Thursday morning in mid-August, the lot empty except for his truck. Hot already, the humidity sitting low under the trees. He topped off his water at the spring he always uses, half a mile in, a reliable little seep that comes out of a rock face and runs into a mossy trough that the trail club keeps clean. He ate a granola bar at the rock overlook he stops at every year, the one that looks out over a valley so wide and green it does not seem real. He reached the shelter by late afternoon on day 1, signed the register, noted he was alone, set up his sleep system on the platform, and cooked dinner on his small stove while the light went out of the sky. That first night was unremarkable. Mice on the mouse line, the usual soft percussion of the wood settling, a barred owl somewhere off to the east. He slept well. He was out early on day 2 and moving north by 7. He passed the blaze at around 10 in the morning. He knew that tree. He had passed it every year, a big red oak sitting just off the left side of the trail. Its bark deeply furrowed, the white rectangular blaze painted on the uphill-facing side at about shoulder height. The blaze pointed the way he was going, straight ahead, the way blazes do on a straightaway. He knew the tree the way you know a landmark you pass every day. This time, the blaze was facing right. Not straight ahead, not slightly angled. 90 degrees to the right, pointing off the trail and down into a hollow he had never given any thought to. He stopped and looked at it. The bark around the blaze looked different from what he remembered. The edges of the paint looked newer. The scar of old paint underneath it looked like it had been scraped or sanded. He reached out and touched the edge of it. The paint was dry, but it did not have the cracked, weathered texture of a blaze that had been there for years. He stood there for a moment. trail blazes get repainted, that happens all the time. The trail maintaining club for this section is active and does good work. Sometimes a reroute gets marked before the signage at the trailhead catches up. He told himself all of this. He looked down the hollow. There was a visible path of sorts, not a maintained trail, but a line where the brush was thinner, the ground more worn, angling steeply downward between the trees. He is the first to admit this was a choice he did not have to make. He could have kept walking north. He had miles to cover and a good pace going and no reason to deviate. But he had done this section 6 times, and there had never been a reroute, and he was curious. The way experienced hikers get curious about terrain they have not seen, and so he followed the blaze. The hollow dropped fast, steeper than it looked from the top. The trees closed in quickly, tulip poplars mostly, with a thick understory of fern and mountain laurel that pressed in on both sides of the path and made it feel narrower than it was. He moved carefully on the loose ground, watching his footing. After about a quarter mile, he stopped and looked around for the next blaze. There was not one. He checked the trees in every direction, the near ones, the far ones, anything that might have a mark on it. Nothing. The path he had been following petered out in a small flat area ringed by laurel, the kind of natural bench you find in hollows where the slope levels off before it drops again. And it was quiet. He noticed that after a moment. Not quiet the way the trail was quiet. Ambient, full of small sounds you stop hearing because they are always there. Quiet the way a room goes quiet when something changes. No insects. He was in Pennsylvania in mid-August, the height of bug season, and there were no insects, no bird sound, no wind in the leaves. The air in the hollow was completely still and completely silent. He stood in that silence for what he says was probably 2 minutes, though it felt longer. He looked at his phone, no signal, which he expected, but also no GPS lock, which was less usual. He looked back up the slope toward where the trail should be. The path he had come down was still there, visible through the laurel. He went back up. He was not running. He was not panicking. He was just a man who had followed a trail mark into a hollow, found nothing at the end of it, and was now walking back out. He told himself that on the way up. He kept his breathing even and his pace steady, and he climbed back up through the fern and the laurel to the ridge. He came out at the red oak. He looked at it. The blaze was gone. Not painted over, not faded. Gone. The bark, where it had been, was clean. No paint, no scraping, no outline, no ghost of a rectangle where the paint had been removed. It looked like the tree had never been marked at all. He put his hand on the bark. He moved his fingers across the spot where he had touched the edge of the paint 40 minutes earlier. Clean bark. The same deep furrows. Nothing else. He stood there for a long time. He says he counted to 30 twice, just to have something to do with his mind while he tried to find a reasonable explanation. He could not find one. Paint does not disappear in 40 minutes. Bark does not regrow. He had touched the blaze. He had felt the paint. He continued north. He finished the trip. He did not go back into the hollow, and he did not report it because he did not know what he would say. The following August, he parked at the same trailhead, walked the same route, and stopped at the same red oak. No blaze, clean bark, same tree, same spot. He went back the year after that, same result. He contacted the trail maintaining club for that section and asked about reroutes in the area, about any work done near that hollow, about whether any blaze trees had been removed or relocated in the past few years. They said no. No reroutes, no blaze removal, no work in that area. They asked him which tree he meant. He described it. They said there was no official blaze on that tree. There never had been. He hikes the section every August. He still stops at that oak. He does not go into the hollow. He says he does not know what he would find at the bottom now, and he has decided he does not need to. The strange part, he says, is not that the blaze disappeared. He has almost made peace with that, or at least stopped expecting an explanation for it. The strange part is the silence in the hollow, because he has been in a lot of hollows and a lot of forests in a lot of seasons, and he has never heard that particular quality of quiet anywhere else. He says it was not the absence of sound. It was more like the presence of listening. He has not been able to say it better than that. He has tried. The next account is different from the others. It comes not from a hiker, but from a man who spent 11 years patrolling the same section of trail, who knew every shelter and spring and bend in the path, and whose faith in ordinary explanations held for a long time. He submitted the account himself eventually. Not to a newspaper or a podcast, to the newsletter of the trail club he had volunteered with for over a decade, in a short letter that the editor ran without editing because, she said later, she did not know what she would have changed. It circulated from there, picked up on a thru-hiker forum where people debated it for weeks, and the consensus, if there was one, was simply that nobody who knew him doubted he was telling the truth. He had been a ridge runner for 11 years on the same 40-mile section in Virginia. That is a volunteer position. You walk the trail, you check the shelters, you talk to hikers, you note damage, you make sure the water sources are clean and the privies are functional and the blazes are visible. You are not a ranger. You do not have enforcement authority. What you have is knowledge, and he had more of it than almost anyone. He knew which shelters flooded in heavy rain, and which springs went dry in August, and which sections of trail turned to clay mud after a storm and grabbed at your boots with every step. He knew the regulars, the section hikers who came through the same week every year, the thru-hikers who signed every register with the same careful handwriting, the trail club members who showed up on work weekends with the right tools and no complaints. He was not prone to imagination. That is the thing people who knew him keep saying. He was the guy who explained things. A strange noise was an animal, or the wind, or the particular way sound traveled through a gap in the ridge. A mark on a tree was a bear or a buck in velvet. He had a practical answer for most things, and he offered it without drama. 11 years of that. It was a Tuesday in October when he found the register entry. He had done the patrol loop he always did on Tuesdays: shelter check, mouse hangers, fire ring, spring box, the slow reading of the register going back 2 weeks to see who had come through. He was at a shelter he had visited probably 400 times. He knew the register box, the way it sat slightly crooked on the post because a hiker had backed into it with a pack frame years ago and bent the bracket. He knew the current register book. He had put it in himself in the spring. He turned back through the pages the way he always did, reading entries, noting anything worth reporting. And then he stopped. The entry was from 3 days prior. A trail name he recognized immediately, because trail names stick when they belong to someone you remember clearly. The hiker had been a young man, early 20s, northbound thru-hiker, the kind who stopped and actually talked to you instead of just nodding and moving on. He had spent 2 nights at this shelter 2 seasons ago. They had talked about the trail, about the young man's plans after he finished, about a particular viewpoint a few miles north that most hikers missed because it was a short bushwhack off the trail but worth every step. He had been reported missing 3 months after that conversation, at the end of his thru-hike attempt. He had signed out of a shelter 40 miles south and never signed into another one. The case was still open. His family had posted in trail forums for months. The entry was in the register. 3 days ago. The trail name, the date, the mileage from the previous shelter, all filled in correctly, the way a hiker fills in a register entry, the way you do it when you have been doing it every day for months, and it is as automatic as breathing. And below the mileage, in the same handwriting, still walking north. He stood there with the register in his hands for a long time. He is practical. He ran through the explanations. Trail names get duplicated. Somebody else could have chosen the same name. The handwriting comparison was in his memory, not a lab, and memory is unreliable. The phrase itself was generic enough. He took a photograph of the page and told himself he would look at it again later with fresh eyes. He sent the photograph to the family that afternoon when he got back to a section of trail with cell service. He framed it carefully in the message. He said he had found an entry using their son's trail name and wanted to check if they recognized the handwriting, that it was probably nothing, that trail names got reused. The mother responded in under an hour. She said the handwriting was her son's. She said she had a postcard he had sent from a resupply town 6 weeks into his hike, and the handwriting matched, the particular way he formed the letters, the slight forward lean of his print. She said, "Still walking north" was the phrase he used every single time he called home from a trail town. Every time, without variation. She said she had not told anyone that it was just something he said, a little habit, something that meant, "I'm okay, I'm still going." He called the county sheriff's office. They logged it. A deputy said they would look into it. Nobody came to examine the register. He was told it was likely a coincidence and that missing persons cases sometimes attracted attention seekers who used the trail registers as a kind of message board. He was told to hold the register in case it became relevant. He held it. That night was the first night in 11 years of ridge running that he did not hike back out to the road at the end of a patrol. He does not have a full explanation for why he stayed. He says it was partly that he did not want to leave the register unattended, and partly something else he has never found the right words for. The shelter had a long platform, plenty of room. He had his sleep system in his pack, which he always carried. He set it up at the near end of the platform, farthest from the register, and he sat for a while in the last of the afternoon light and watched the tree line and thought about the young man he had talked to 2 seasons ago. He left his headlamp on low. He told himself he would hear anyone coming up the gravel path. The shelter approach was 20 yards of pea gravel, the loudest surface on the trail, impossible to walk quietly. He told himself that. He did not sleep for a long time, but eventually he did sleep. He had been walking since early morning, and the body insists, regardless of what the mind is doing. He slept, and at 3 a.m. something woke him. He was not sure at first what had pulled him out of sleep. The headlamp was still on, casting its low amber light across the platform, throwing soft shadows against the back wall of the shelter. The tree line beyond the open face was black. The gravel path was empty. He lay still and listened the way people listen when they wake in an unfamiliar place and are not sure why. Then he heard it again, a pen moving on paper, slow and deliberate, the specific scratch of a ballpoint working across a page. It was coming from the far end of the platform where the register box sat on its crooked bracket. He knew that sound. He had heard it hundreds of times. Hikers signing in, working through the register fields, writing their little notes. He knew exactly what it was. There was nobody at the far end of the platform. His headlamp beam reached that far, the platform was empty, the register box was closed, and yet the sound continued for another 3 or 4 seconds, unhurried, like someone finishing a sentence, and then stopped. He lay still for 2 full minutes. He counted the seconds deliberately, the way you count when you need your mind to be doing something concrete. He watched the register box. He watched the tree line beyond the open face of the shelter. He watched the gravel path. Nothing moved. He sat up slowly and pointed his headlamp directly at the register box. It was closed, the latch down, same as he had left it before he went to sleep. He crossed the platform in 4 careful steps, unlatched the box and opened it. The register was open to a new page. He had left it on the page with the original entry. He had turned to it after dinner to look at it again. It was not on that page anymore. It was open to the next page, a fresh one, and there was a new entry at the top, same trail name, tonight's date. No mileage listed, no destination. You're in my spot. He stood over it for a long moment. His headlamp caught the ink, blue ballpoint. He had one pen in his chest pocket. He always carried the same pen on patrol, a red fine point that he used to initial shelter logs. He pulled it out and looked at it. Red. He put it back. He did not have a blue pen. He had not packed one. He had not seen one in the shelter. That was when he noticed the smell. It came to him gradually, the way smells do when you are not looking for them. A faint, clean scent. Something like a particular brand of bar soap. The kind that comes in paper wrappers and smells slightly of eucalyptus. He noticed it because it was specific, and he noticed it because he had smelled it before, in this shelter, 2 seasons ago, on a warm evening when a young thru-hiker had done laundry at the creek and hung his shirt on the mouse line to dry and mentioned the soap with some pride, said his mother had packed it for him from home, said he used it sparingly to make it last. He could not explain why he remembered that. He could not explain why the smell was there. He checked his radio. The battery indicator showed empty. He had plugged it into his battery bank before he went to sleep. A bank he had fully charged 2 days prior and used only briefly since. The bank's indicator light was also dead. He pressed the power button on both devices. Nothing. The trail was 2 miles from the nearest road in either direction. The weather had moved in while he slept. He could hear it now. A low wind coming through the trees and the first ticking of rain on the shelter roof. Leaving on a dark trail in rain at 3 a.m. with no radio was not a reasonable option. He knew that trail well enough to walk it blind, but not well enough to walk it safely on wet rocks in the dark when nobody knew to expect him. He was staying until dawn. He moved to the center of the platform, sat with his back against the rear wall, his legs in front of him, the open face of the shelter directly in view. He set his headlamp to its highest setting. He put his red pen in his shirt pocket and his car keys in his right hand, and he sat. The rain picked up. It made a steady sound on the tin roof, the kind of sound that fills a shelter and makes it feel smaller, closer, more separate from everything outside. He was glad for it and frightened of it in equal measure. Glad because it meant the sounds inside were sharper by contrast. Frightened because it meant any sound approaching from outside would be covered until it was very close. He heard footsteps on the gravel at 3:40. He swept the headlamp toward the path. Empty. The gravel was wet now, darker than usual, and the rain was hitting it in a way that caught the light and made the shadows jump. He kept the beam steady and watched for 30 seconds. Nothing. At 4:15, footsteps again. He was ready this time, did not move the headlamp at first, just listened. The steps were deliberate. One at a time, the specific crunch of gravel under weight, coming up the path toward the shelter. He counted 6 steps, maybe 7. Then silence. Then the headlamp. The path was empty. At 4:50, the footsteps came a third time. He heard them coming from a greater distance, from farther down the path than before, slow and steady and getting closer. He sat absolutely still with his back against the wall, and his headlamp aimed at the path, and he watched. The steps came up the gravel and stopped. Not at the shelter entrance. Closer. At the very edge of the headlamp's reach, where the light began to lose its confidence and the darkness started to win. They stopped there, right at that edge, and did not continue. He kept the headlamp aimed at that spot until the sky outside began to separate from the tree line. First gray, then lighter gray, then a thin, cold light that moved across the shelter clearing and turned the gravel pale. When the shape of the trees became distinct, he stood up. His back hurt. His legs were stiff. He had not moved from that position in over an hour. He checked the register before he left. 3 new entries, same handwriting, same blue ink. 3 different times logged across the night, 3:40, 4:15, 4:50. Each entry, the trail name. Each entry, a different single line. The first said, "Here." The second said, "Still here." The third said, "I'll come back." He hiked out in the early morning rain and drove directly to the trail club coordinator's office and gave her the register. She looked at the entries for a long time and did not say much. The club contacted the county. The county looked at the entries, noted there was no way to verify authorship, and determined it was most likely a prank. Someone who knew the missing hiker's trail name and had decided to be cruel about it. It was a conclusion that required believing someone had hiked to that shelter in the rain in the middle of the night with a blue pen and a specific bar of soap and a sound that traveled across a platform without a body attached to it. He gave the county their determination without argument. He gave the register page to the family when they asked for it. He retired from volunteering that winter quietly, without making a thing of it. He still hikes the AT, other sections, other states, with no particular pattern. He reads the register at every shelter he stops at. He photographs any page that seems wrong before he moves on. It has become a habit he cannot explain and does not try to. The family framed the register page. It is in their living room. The mother told him this when she called to thank him for giving it to them. She said she found it comforting. She said it made her feel like he was still out there somewhere, still walking north. He said he was glad it helped. He said it quietly, and when he got off the call, he sat in his truck in his driveway for a while before he went inside. He has said since then that the thing he cannot account for is not the footsteps, or the smell, or the dead radio, or even the entries themselves. It is that last line, "I'll come back." Because a prank does not need a third act. A prank makes its point and stops. Someone who came out in the rain in the middle of the night to be cruel had already made their point twice over. The third entry was not for him. That is what bothers him. He does not know who it was for. Another account, this one from the very beginning of the trail, where the woods are dense and southern and the nights come in fast, and 2 people who had never spent a night in a tent discovered that some things do not care whether you are experienced. They had done everything right. That is the part that stays with you when you hear this account. Not that they were reckless or unprepared, or the kind of people who wander into the woods without thinking. They had rented quality gear from an outfitter in Atlanta, who spent 40 minutes fitting their packs and walking them through the weight distribution. They had watched videos. They had read the shelter register system and understood how it worked. They had filed a trip plan with the ranger station and left a copy with her mother. They had bought the right food, packed the right layers, chosen a beginner-friendly section near Springer Mountain in Georgia because it was well-traveled and well-marked and as close to a guaranteed good experience as the trail offers. They were in their early 30s. It was her idea. She had done day hikes for years and wanted to try something longer. He had never backpacked before. He was willing, genuinely, not just going along with it. They were the kind of couple that handles new things well, that laughs at their own mistakes, that does not need it to be perfect to have a good time. They left the car at a small gravel lot at the trailhead. One other vehicle was there when they arrived. a mud-spattered pickup with a kayak rack and a parking permit on the dash. The trail register at the kiosk had entries going back 3 days, a couple from Ohio, a solo hiker who had already pushed north by the time they arrived. The woods were quiet in the way Georgia woods are quiet in late October, that particular dry leaf stillness that comes after the insects are done for the year and before the winter birds have fully settled in. They made good miles for first-timers. She set the pace, measured, steady, the kind of pace that does not feel like much in the first hour and feels exactly right in the fourth. He complained about his hip belt once and she adjusted it without stopping. They took a lunch break at a flat rock near a creek crossing and ate their carefully portioned trail mix and agreed it was already worth it. They set up camp in the late afternoon, well before dark, in a flat spot just off the trail where previous campers had already flattened the ground. This was the part he had been most nervous about, the tent, but it went up cleanly in about 12 minutes and he was unreasonably proud of it. She showed him the food hang, the way you throw the cord over a branch and counterbalance the bags so a bear cannot reach them. They ate freeze-dried chili from the pouches, sitting on the ground outside the tent in the last of the light, the steam coming off the food in the cool air. They talked too loudly for the first hour, their voices carrying in the quiet the way voices do when you are not used to the silence around them. At some point, they stopped talking as loudly. Not a decision, just a gradual adjustment to the scale of the quiet, the way you lower your voice in a library without being told to. The dark came in quickly after that, the way it does in the mountains, and they got into the tent before it was fully dark, and zipped it closed and lay on their sleeping pads and talked quietly for a while about nothing in particular. At 10, something walked around the tent. He heard it first, a sound of weight moving through the dry leaves, not twigs snapping, not the sudden crash of a startled deer, but a slow, deliberate movement all the way around the tent's perimeter. Full circle, never pausing, never rushing. He lay still and listened, and when it completed the circle, he said quietly, "Did you hear that?" She had heard it. She said deer. He said that sounded right. She had read about deer circling campsites, attracted by the salt in sweat-dried clothing or the unfamiliar smell of synthetic gear. He accepted this. They lay quietly for a few minutes, and then the sound did not come back and they stopped talking about it, and eventually he was almost asleep. At midnight it came back. Same weight, same deliberate pace, same full circle around the tent, moving through the leaves with that particular quality of silence that she had noted the first time, and he had not quite registered. No twigs. A dry October forest floor is full of twigs. She had hiked enough to know what it sounded like when a deer moved through leaves. Deer broke things. Whatever this was moved through the debris of the forest floor without breaking a single thing, which was not how weight worked, which was not how anything with mass worked on a surface like that. It came all the way around, and then it stopped. It stopped at the tent door. He felt her hand find his arm in the dark. Neither of them spoke. The zipper was 6 inches from his face. It was a good zipper. A quality tent, it would not move on its own. He knew that. He lay with his eyes on it anyway. The mesh of the inner door, the fly beyond it, and past that, whatever was standing on the other side. 4 minutes. She timed it later, going back through her memory and trying to reconstruct it honestly. 4 minutes of standing still at the tent door. No sound of breathing, no shifting of weight, no scratch against the fabric. Just presence, the specific quality of something being there that is not moving. Then it moved away. She gave it 2 full minutes after the sound disappeared before she unzipped the tent 3 inches and put her headlamp through the gap. The ground at the tent door had 2 long, parallel impressions in the flattened grass. not round like a hoof, not spread like a paw. 2 narrow parallel marks, close together, the distance between them about the width of a human stance. Like something had stood there on 2 points of contact and stood very still for a very long time. She looked at them for a moment and then zipped the tent closed and did not say anything for a while. They did not sleep much after that. They lay in the dark and listened, and the woods gave them nothing further. No more circling, no more presence at the door, just the ordinary quiet of an October night in Georgia. When the sky began to lighten, they packed their gear with quick, efficient movements, neither of them talking much, and they were on the trail before full sunrise. They did not finish the trip. They made the decision without really discussing it, the way couples make decisions they already agree on. She said she had left something in the car, and they both understood what that meant. They walked out fast, 3 miles to the trailhead, loaded the packs into the back of the car, and drove to the ranger station at the edge of the park. The ranger who took the report was a man in his 50s, with a calm, unhurried manner and a way of writing notes that made you feel like he had heard most things before. He listened to the full account. He asked if they had seen anything. They said no. He asked if the food hang had been disturbed. She said no. He asked a few more practical questions and wrote down the answers. Then he said, "That's usually how it goes on that section." He did not elaborate. He capped his pen and thanked them for reporting it and asked if they needed anything else. They said no. They walked out to the parking lot. She took a photograph of the impressions before they broke camp. She looked at it later on her phone, zoomed in, turned the brightness up. The marks were there, visible, real, the grass distinctly flattened in 2 narrow parallel lines. Not clear enough to prove anything specific, not ambiguous enough to dismiss entirely. She showed it to the ranger the next morning when she drove back alone to retrieve the gear they had left at the site. He looked at it for a moment and said the impressions could have been caused by tent stakes that had shifted in the night. She pointed out that the tent stakes were still in the ground on all 4 corners. He nodded. He did not offer another explanation. The gear was still there when she went back, exactly where they had left it. The tent, the sleeping pads, the food bags, everything still hanging, still latched, nothing touched. The impressions in the grass were still there too, though flattened further by the dew. She finished the section the following spring. She went alone, deliberately, because she said she needed to know it was nothing, that it had been a deer or a bear or a sound trick or some combination of ordinary things that had assembled themselves into something that felt more than it was. She hiked the whole section and camped in the same spot and slept well, and heard nothing unusual, and came back out feeling, she said, mostly better. She has not talked about what happened on night 2 of that solo trip. A different kind of account follows this one. Not a hiker's story, but a story that started with a hiker's forum post that someone deleted before most people could read it. The post was up for about 6 hours before it disappeared. Long enough for 3 people to read it and reply, short enough that most of the forum never saw it. One of the people who read it copied the text before it was gone. Not for any particular reason, just a habit of saving things that seemed like they might matter. The screenshot circulated quietly in a smaller hiking group for about a year, before someone with a newsletter published a summary with identifying details removed. That is how this account exists. The original poster has never confirmed or denied it. They have not posted on the forum since. The hiker was a northbound thru-hiker, male, somewhere in his 30s based on the writing, mid-July when it happened. He had reached a trail town in New Jersey after a long stretch through the ridge section, the kind of road walk that brings you into a small town for a few hours before the trail picks back up on the other side. He described the town the way hikers describe trail towns they like. a gas station with a deli counter that made real sandwiches, a picnic table out front where hikers gathered, a post office that held packages without complaint, a general friendliness toward people with large packs and questionable odor. Normal. He said it was normal twice in the post, which is the kind of thing you notice when you read it, knowing what comes after. He bought a turkey sandwich at the gas station deli and ate it at the picnic table with another northbound hiker he had been leapfrogging for 3 days. They talked for an hour, the way hikers talk when they finally stop moving, about miles and weather and gear failures and the particular misery and satisfaction of the ridge section they had just come through. The other hiker was staying in town for the night. He decided to push on, 2 more miles to a shelter past the road crossing. He had the miles in his legs and he wanted the quiet. He picked up the trail on the far side of town, a white blaze on a telephone pole marking where the road walk ended and the woods began. The afternoon was hot and hazy, the July humidity sitting heavily on everything, and the woods on the other side of the road felt cooler immediately, the way woods always do. He settled into his pace. About 10 minutes in, a car came down the road behind him. He was still on the road walk portion, the shoulder narrow enough that he stepped slightly into the grass to let it pass. It passed. He registered it the way you register traffic when you are mostly thinking about something else. A dark sedan, moving at normal speed, no particular reason to pay attention. 10 minutes later, the same car came back. From the opposite direction this time, which meant it had gone down the road, turned around somewhere, and come back. Same car, he was certain of it. Same color, same model. A dent on the rear quarter panel he had noticed the first time. The driver looked at him as it passed. Not a casual glance. A sustained, expressionless look. The kind that has no social meaning attached to it. No nod, no acknowledgement. Just looking. For the 2 or 3 seconds it took the car to go by. He did not like it. He noted it and did not like it and kept walking. And by the time he reached the trailhead and stepped off the road and into the trees, the unease had mostly faded the way unease does when you are moving. And the scenery is changing and there is always something new to look at. The shelter was 2 miles in. He made it in under an hour, signed the register, found himself alone, set up his sleep system on the platform, and ate the second half of his sandwich. The shelter sat in a small clearing with a fire ring and a bear box bolted to a post. He noted the bear box when he arrived. It was the kind of section where they were required, and his bear box had cracked 3 weeks prior outside a town in Pennsylvania, and he had not replaced it yet, still using a soft bag hung from a cord the way people did before the boxes became mandatory. He was aware this was technically out of compliance. He hung it high, and with the best knot he knew, and told himself it was fine. He was asleep by 10. At some point in the night he woke up. He was not sure what had woken him. He lay still and listened, the way the previous nights of this account have taught you to expect, and then he heard it, an engine idling. Not on the road, which was 2 miles back. From the direction of the old fire road that ran parallel to the trail, about 40 yards east of the shelter. He knew there was a fire road there because he had crossed it coming in and noted it was overgrown. The crown of the road humped up with weeds and small saplings pushing through the gravel. The kind of road that had not seen regular traffic in years. The engine was steady. No music, no voices. Just the idle of a heavy vehicle, a truck or an SUV, something with a larger engine than a sedan, sitting in the dark on a road that should have been impassable. He watched the tree line in the direction of the sound. No headlights visible. The engine ran for 11 minutes. He timed it on his phone because he needed something to do with his hands. At 11 minutes, it cut off. The silence that followed felt different from the silence before it. Heavier. The way silence feels when something has just stopped rather than when nothing has ever started. He did not sleep again. In the morning, he found two things. The first was the tire tracks on the fire road. Deep, fresh, the kind a heavy vehicle makes in soft ground. Two full sets going in and the same two sets coming out, pointing back toward a gate he had not looked at closely the previous evening. The vegetation between the tracks was crushed and still green, which meant recent. The tracks were the width of a full-size truck. The second was his food bag. It was on the ground beneath where he had hung it, the cord that had connected it to the branch lying beside it in a loose coil. The bag was closed. Nothing had been taken, nothing disturbed. The food was all there. The bag was latched. His bare canister of camp soap and trash was still inside. The cord had not been chewed through. He picked up the end and looked at it. It had been cut. Clean, straight, a single cut with something sharp. Someone had stood beneath his hang in the dark and cut the cord and set the bag on the ground and left. He reported it at the next ranger station, 8 miles north. The ranger who took the report said the fire road had been gated and locked for 3 years, that it was decommissioned and off limits. He went back with the ranger to look at the gate. It was locked. A heavy chain, a padlock that showed no signs of being forced. The tire tracks continued past it on both sides, going in and coming out. Nobody had an explanation for how a vehicle had passed a locked gate and left tracks on both sides of it. The ranger noted the cut cord and the bag on the ground and said it might have been someone checking for food improperly stored. A local who knew the area and used the fire road for access, who had maybe intended to confiscate the bag and changed his mind. It was a soft explanation, and the ranger knew it and did not push it. He posted about it that evening from a hostel in the next town. He wrote it out carefully, all the details in order: the car on the road, the engine at night, the cut cord, the tracks past the locked gate. He posted it in a thru-hiker forum where he had been an active member for 2 years. 3 people replied before he deleted it. All 3 had hiked the same section within the past 2 years. All 3 described something similar: a vehicle sound in the night from that fire road, in a section where no vehicle should have been, in a spot where the road had been officially closed for years. None of them had reported it. None of them had talked about it until they saw his post. He deleted the post 6 hours after he put it up. The next day, someone sent him a private message through the forum. The message said, "Don't keep that up for your own sake." He did not recognize the username. When he went to look at the profile, it was gone, either deleted or set to private. He could not tell which. He has not posted on that forum since. He finished his thru hike that September, and by all accounts completed it without further incident. At least none he has shared publicly. The screenshot of his original post resurfaced 2 years later in a different hiking community, passed around in the way that things get passed around when nobody is quite sure what to do with them. The identifying details were blurred: his trail name, the specific shelter, the exact mileage. What remained was the shape of it: the car, the engine in the night, the cord end cut clean, the bag sitting on the ground with nothing taken. Someone who posted the screenshot added one line at the bottom: "The gate is still locked. The road is still closed. People still hear engines on it." Nobody who reads that account is sure whether to be more disturbed by what happened in the woods or by the private message. Because a locked gate and a fire road, and someone who knows the backcountry well enough to navigate it without headlights, that has a human explanation, even if it is not a comfortable one. But the message is something else. The message means someone was watching the forum who knew what had happened, who did not want it discussed, who knew his trail name well enough to find his profile. He does not know who sent it. He says he has thought about it a lot. He says the more he thinks about it, the less he wants an answer. The next account is the hardest to hear. It comes from a search and rescue volunteer in North Carolina who has spent years looking for people in these mountains and who found, on a clear winter morning with no good reason for what she was looking at, something she has not been able to put in a category. She has told this account twice. Once in an official debrief, which was logged and filed and produced a report that said very little, and once on a hiking podcast 2 years after the search, under the condition that the missing man's name not be used and the specific location be kept vague. She said she was not telling it to frighten anyone. She said she was telling it because she had been carrying it alone for 2 years and it was getting heavier. She had been doing search and rescue in the western North Carolina mountains for 11 years when the call came in. She was good at it, methodical and calm, the kind of volunteer that incident commanders put at the front of a grid search because she noticed things. She had found people alive, and she had found people who did not make it, and she had developed, over those 11 years, a set of reliable instincts about what a search was going to produce before it produced it. She could read a scene. She trusted that. This search broke something in that trust. The missing man was in his late 40s. Experienced, not expert, but genuinely experienced. The kind of hiker who had done this particular section of the AT in winter before and knew what it required. He had filed a trip plan. He had the right gear for the conditions. He had gone overdue by 1 day before his family activated the search, which was fast enough to mean they had been paying attention and slow enough to mean they had given him the benefit of the doubt, which is what you do when someone you trust tells you they know what they are doing out there. The weather had been clear. No ice storm, no flash flooding, no sudden temperature drops severe enough to cause trouble for someone properly equipped. There was no obvious environmental explanation for why he had not come out. She joined the search on day 2. The incident command had already established that his car was at the trailhead, that his last known position from his trip plan was a campsite approximately 8 miles in, and that a shelter register 7 miles north of that campsite had an entry in what appeared to be his handwriting. She reviewed that entry on day 2. His trail name, the date, which was the day after he was last confirmed at the campsite, the mileage from the previous shelter filled in correctly, and below his entry, in different handwriting, in a different pen, a single line. He didn't make it past the creek. Nobody on the search team could identify who had written it. The register was examined carefully. The entry was in blue ink. His entry was in black. The search coordinator noted it in the incident log. The handwriting of the second entry did not match any other entry in that register going back 3 weeks. Nobody had reported being in that section on the date it was written. It should not have been there. The creek in question was a standard winter ford, knee-deep at that time of year, cold but crossable for someone with proper footwear and poles. The search team examined the bank carefully. 1 set of boot prints in the mud going in, none coming out. Not on the near bank, not on the far bank. 1 set of prints going into the water and then nothing, as if the water had simply taken him, except the water was not high enough or fast enough to do that, and there was no indication of a slip or a fall on the near bank. No disturbance of the mud. No sign of anything other than someone stepping into the creek in a deliberate, controlled way and not coming out. The search expanded. 6 days total, a grid that covered the terrain in all directions from the creek ford. Trained dogs. A helicopter with thermal imaging on days 4 and 5 when the cloud cover allowed it. Nothing. He was not in the creek, not on the banks downstream, not in the terrain adjacent to the trail. He was not anywhere the search could find him. She found the campsite on day 4. She says she knew something was wrong before she was close enough to see it clearly. She has thought about that since. about what her brain was registering at the edge of perception before it assembled the information into something she could name. She thinks now it was the arrangement, the way the objects in the clearing were distributed in a pattern that does not occur naturally, that required intention. His gear was arranged in a circle around the cold fire ring. Every item, his tent, collapsed and folded. His sleeping bag rolled. His stove, his cook pot, his water filter. His food bag, which was still full, still packed as if for the next day's miles. His trekking poles crossed, his journal, his headlamp, every item he had carried into the backcountry, arranged around the fire ring with the open face of each item pointing outward, away from the center. She stopped walking when she saw it. Her search partner stopped beside her. They stood at the edge of the clearing for several minutes without approaching. She says there is no protocol for that. She says protocol covers a lot of things and this was not one of them. She and her partner looked at each other and then looked back at the clearing and then walked in, carefully, noting where they stepped. In the center of the circle, where the fire ring was, there were two objects that did not belong to the gear arrangement. Not in the fire ring, not burned. Just placed in the center on the ground next to each other. His boots, both of them. Upright, side by side, toes pointing outward toward the tree line. She stood over them for a long time. The boots were the kind he always wore. His family confirmed this later, confirmed the brand and the model and the specific wear pattern on the soles that matched the prints at the creek bank. He wore them every day on the trail. His family said he wore them off the trail too, that he was the kind of man who put his boots on in the morning and took them off at night and never went outside in anything else. She photographed everything before anything was touched. The search coordinator was notified by radio. The site was treated as a potential crime scene, and the gear was collected as evidence. The boots were bagged and logged, and eventually, months later, when the case produced nothing further and no remains had been found, returned to the family. No footprints approached the campsite from outside the circle. The soft ground around the clearing showed her own prints, her partner's prints, and a faint confusion of older boot prints near the fire ring consistent with someone who had camped there. Nothing else. No tracks coming in from the tree line to arrange the gear. No tracks at all that did not belong to the missing man himself. No explanation for who had arranged it. No explanation for when. No explanation for the boots. The case was classified as a missing persons case and remained open. No cause of death determined. No remains recovered as of the date of the podcast recording. She said, at the end of that first hour of the podcast, that she had been doing this work for 11 years, and she knew how scenes communicated. She knew what a sight looked like when someone had been in distress, when they had been injured, when they had made a decision under pressure, when something had gone wrong in any of the ways things went wrong in the backcountry. She knew those scenes. She did not know this one. She had looked at it from every angle she had, and she did not know what it was telling her. She said that was what kept her up. Not the not knowing. The feeling that it was telling her something she did not have the right framework to understand. The journal was found in the circle with everything else, sealed in its waterproof case, dry and intact. It was logged as evidence. She was asked to review it for route information, for any indication of where he might have gone after the campsite. She read it, cover to cover. She said it was a normal hiker's journal for almost all of its pages. Trip notes, mileage, weather observations, descriptions of views and water sources and shelter conditions. The kind of journal an experienced hiker keeps because the details matter, and memory is less reliable than you think when you are tired and covering miles every day. 2 years of AT trips, all logged carefully. The last 3 entries were different. She did not read those entries in order at first. She was moving through the journal quickly, looking for route information, and the change in tone caught her eye before she had consciously registered what she was reading. She went back to the beginning of the shift and started again, slowly. The entry from 3 days before he was reported missing described someone on the trail behind him. Not in alarming terms, in the careful, observational tone he used for everything. He had become aware of footsteps behind him on a ridge section, a steady sound about 30 or 40 yards back, close enough to hear clearly, but far enough that he could not see anyone when he looked. He assumed another hiker. The trail is a shared resource. People hike at different paces and leapfrog each other for days without ever formally meeting. He had pulled to the side twice to let the person pass. They had not passed. He had slowed his pace deliberately. The sound had slowed with him. He had stopped at a viewpoint and eaten a snack and waited a full 20 minutes. No one appeared. He had written, "Probably sound carrying on the ridge." These long exposed sections can do that, throw noise around in ways that seem like they have a source when they don't. Moved on. The second entry, 2 days before he was reported missing, returned to it. He had heard the footsteps again, same quality, same distance, same behavior, matching his pace, slowing when he slowed, stopping when he stopped. He had tried a different approach this time. He had walked fast for a quarter mile, faster than he normally moved, a pace that would have been difficult to maintain casually. The footsteps had matched him. He had stopped abruptly. The footsteps had stopped after exactly one beat, the delay of someone who almost anticipated the stop, but not quite. He had tried calling out. He had said hello, said he could hear them back there, said if they needed anything he was happy to wait. No response. The sound had simply been there, and then, when he turned to look directly back down the trail, it was not there. He could not see anyone on the section of trail visible from where he stood, which was a long straightaway, with good sight lines in both directions. He wrote, "I've decided it's just sound carrying weird on this ridge. Going to camp early and let them pass me. They'll have to go by the site." She said that sentence stayed with her. The certainty in it, the practical logic of it, the way an experienced hiker thinks about another hiker, assumes benign intent. Assumes that if you stop moving, the other person will pass and the thing will resolve itself. That was not naivety. That was how it worked on the trail, 99 times out of 100. You stop, they pass, the leapfrog continues. He had done the reasonable thing. The entry ended there. The next morning's entry was the last one. It was brief, the kind of entry a hiker writes when they are already thinking about the day's miles and not about the journal. Good sleep. Temperature dropped overnight. Frost on the tent fly, cleared by 7. 12 miles planned to the next shelter. Water situation fine. No mention of the sound. No mention of the night. As if he had gone to sleep with the footsteps unresolved and woken up and decided they were nothing, which was the reasonable thing to decide, except she checked the shelter registers for that section. Every shelter in both directions, the full span of trail that covered his planned route. She looked for any other hiker who might have signed in within 2 days of him, who might have been behind him on that section, who might have been the reasonable explanation for what he heard. No other hiker had signed in within 2 days of him in either direction. The trailhead log showed one vehicle at the parking area on the day he started, his. No other vehicles for the 2 days prior or the 2 days following. The zone he was hiking required a permit for camping. She pulled the permit records. He was the only permitted hiker in that zone for the 4 days surrounding the events in the journal. No one else was on that trail with him. She went back to the entry, 30 or 40 yards back, matching pace, stopping when he stopped, slowing when he slowed, coming from directly behind him on a ridge with long sight lines where she should have been able to see anyone standing there. They stopped, too. That was the line from the second entry. He had camped early to let them pass. They stopped, too. She said she read that line 4 or 5 times before she kept going, because the logic of it was so clear and so wrong at the same time. If you are another hiker and you see someone camp early in a flat spot and pitch their tent, you keep walking. You have miles to do. You keep going. There is no reason to stop. There is no reason to make camp yourself 30 or 40 yards back in the woods, invisible, at a distance close enough to hear but too far to see. Unless you are not another hiker. Unless stopping when he stopped was not a response to his actions but something else. Something that operated on a different logic, that she did not have a category for. She does not say that in those words. She is careful about that. She says there was no other registered hiker, no other vehicle, no other permit. She says the journal entries described behavior that did not match what another hiker would do. She says she does not have an explanation that satisfies her. She does not say anything beyond that. She is precise about where her knowledge ends. The podcast host asked her, at the end, whether she thought the footsteps and whatever arranged the campsite were the same thing. She was quiet for a moment. She said she did not know. She said the footsteps were 2 days before the campsite. She said a lot of things can happen in 2 days on a trail that far from anywhere. She said the case was still open and she hoped it stayed open. She hoped someone found something that explained it. She said she genuinely believed that was possible, that somewhere in those mountains there was an explanation waiting to be found. Then she said she hoped the family never read the last 3 journal entries. She said it quietly, not dramatically. She was not trying to imply something beyond what she was saying. She said she hoped they did not read them because the journal overall was a good record of a man who loved being in those mountains, and she thought it was better to remember it that way, as a whole thing, rather than to have those last 3 entries sitting in your memory where they did not belong. The Park Service was holding the journal pending case closure. The family had formally requested it back. She hoped they got it. She also hoped, she said, that if they did get it, someone would quietly remove the last 3 entries before they read it. Not to hide the truth from them. Just because those entries were written by a man who had not yet understood what was happening, who was still trying to explain it reasonably, and she thought there was something cruel about reading a person's last attempt to be reasonable when you already knew how the story ended. She stopped doing solo searches after that winter. She did not make an announcement about it. She just began requiring a partner for any search on that section of trail as a matter of personal protocol, and nobody questioned it because her instincts had always been good and the request seemed reasonable. She still volunteers. She is good at it. She still finds people. She does not hike the AT recreationally anymore. She has tried to explain why to friends who hike and who ask her about it, and the explanation she comes back to is not the campsite or the journal or the register entry, though all of those are part of it. It is the boots. He was the kind of man who wore his boots from morning to night. His family told her this when she called to update them on the search before the campsite was found. They said he had hiked in those boots for 3 years. He resoled them twice because he did not want to break in a new pair. He wore them to the grocery store, to his daughter's soccer games, everywhere. His family said he joked that he slept in them. His family said he would never voluntarily take them off outside, never. She says she thinks about the boots on cold mornings. She does not say why cold mornings specifically. She says she does not know what it means that they were there, placed neatly in the center of that circle with the toes pointing out, placed by hands she cannot account for, on ground that showed no tracks but his own. She says she does not know what it means. She says she thinks about it anyway. A different kind of witness tells the next story. Not someone who was on the trail, but someone who has spent 40 years watching people come off it, and who noticed, over all that time, that some of them came off one particular section looking like they had left something behind that they were not going to get back. He arrived at the shelter in the late afternoon of a Thursday in September, and the first thing he did was check the register. 4 days since the last entry. A solo section hiker who had noted the spring was running well, and the privy needed attention. He made a mental note about the privy, signed in with his trail name, and set his pack down on the platform with the specific relief of a man who has been carrying weight all day and has finally put it somewhere else. He had chosen this Vermont section deliberately. He had done it twice before, once in summer and once in early fall, and he knew it was beautiful in September in the way Vermont is beautiful in September. The maples starting to turn at the higher elevations, the air with that particular quality of cool and clear that makes everything look more saturated than usual. The trail quieter than it would be in peak leaf season, but not empty. He liked solo shelter nights. He liked the register box, the little ritual of reading who had been there before and leaving something for whoever came after. He liked the specific architecture of a 3-sided lean-to, the way it framed the woods outside like a painting you could sit inside. This shelter had a loft. Not every shelter does. It was an older structure, built in a style that added a raised storage platform above the main sleeping level, accessible by a short wooden ladder nailed to the back wall. Some shelters use the loft for storing a few communal items, a spare tarp, some emergency candles, things people left for others. He checked it when he arrived and found nothing useful. Just a folded piece of tarp that had seen better years and a length of paracord left on a nail. He left them there and came back down and started cooking dinner. He cooked a real meal. That was a point of pride for him on section hikes. Not the freeze-dried pouches, but actual ingredients carried in small containers. A decent pasta dish that took 20 minutes and required some attention. He filtered water from the spring, which was indeed running well. A clean cold flow into a small stone basin that the trail club had lined with concrete sometime in the past decade. He read for an hour after dinner, a paperback he had been working through for 2 weeks, sitting on the platform with his headlamp angled to catch the page. He organized his gear for the morning, hung his food bag, set up his sleep system carefully with his sleeping pad centered on the platform boards, and his pack tucked against the back wall. He fell asleep before 9. He was good at sleeping in shelters, better than in hotels, he said. Something about the sound of the woods at night, the specific ambient quiet of a forest after dark, had always worked on him like a sedative. The scratching started around 11. He surfaced enough to register it, categorize it, and go back to sleep without fully waking. Mice. Vermont shelters in September had mice the way September had shortening days, inevitably, reliably, as a feature of the season. They came in from the cooling woods looking for anything that smelled like food, and even a clean shelter with a good mouse line would have them running the rafters and investigating every corner. He had mouse-proofed his food bag and his pack. The scratching was from the loft. He noted it and dismissed it and slept. The first night was fine. The second day was good. He covered his planned miles, took a long lunch at a viewpoint that looked out over a series of ridges going blue and hazy in the distance, reached a road crossing in the early afternoon, resupplied from the small box he had cached in his car at a trailhead 2 days prior. He was back at the shelter by 4, the light already going amber in the trees. He cooked his second real meal. He read more of the paperback. He checked the register again, still only his entry. He was alone for the second night. He set up his sleep system in the same position as the night before, and was in his sleeping bag before dark. He listened to the woods settle. He was comfortable, warm, in the specific way you are warm when the air outside is cool enough to make the sleeping bag feel earned. He was asleep by 9:30. The scratching started again. Same loft, same quality of sound, same irregular rhythm of mice moving around a wooden platform. He registered it and did not fully wake. Then it stopped. Old cabins make noise. Shelters make noise. Wood expands and contracts with temperature change. Mice redirect. Sounds start and stop for no particular reason. The stopping of the scratching was not what woke him. What woke him was the silence where the scratching had been, because that silence had a quality to it that the ordinary silence of the shelter did not have. He noticed the difference before he could name it. Then the breathing started. Slow. Even. Through the nose, the specific pattern of nasal breathing rather than mouth breathing. Coming from directly above him. From the loft. 6 feet up, maybe less, the platform boards of the loft between him and whatever was producing the sound. He lay still. His headlamp was within reach, clipped to the front of his sleeping bag where he kept it at night. He did not reach for it yet. He told himself, carefully and deliberately, that he was listening to his own breathing, echoing off the wooden ceiling of the shelter, that enclosed wooden spaces did strange things with sound, that he was slightly groggy, and his perception was not fully calibrated. He told himself all of this, and then he held his own breath, and the breathing above him continued, steady and unhurried, at a pace entirely independent of his own. He let his breath out slowly. He reached for the headlamp. He did not point it directly into the loft. He pointed it at the back wall of the shelter and let the reflected light fill the space, a softer illumination than a direct beam. In that light, he could see the underside of the loft platform, the rough-cut boards with their gaps and knotholes, and he could see the dust that floated in the still air of the shelter. The dust was moving, not the way dust moves when there is a draft, not the random drift of particles in circulating air, the way dust moves when weight shifts on a surface above it, when boards flex slightly under pressure, releasing the particles that have settled in the gaps. He watched the dust move in a slow, drifting pattern above his head, and he understood what he was looking at before he let himself think the words. Something was up there. Something with enough mass to flex the boards and shift the settled dust. Not a mouse, not a squirrel. Something that breathed in a slow, even pattern through its nose. He lay still for a long time. He is honest about how long. He says he does not know exactly, because his perception of time had become unreliable, but he thinks it was close to 15 minutes. He thought about the ladder on the back wall. He thought about the loft edge, which was open, no railing, just the drop from the platform to the main shelter floor. He thought about what it would mean to be seen reaching for his trekking pole, and he thought about what it would mean to do nothing. He reached for the trekking pole. Slowly, the way you move when every instinct is telling you that speed would be a mistake. He extended it toward the underside of the loft shelf, found a gap between the boards, and pushed upward. Gently, not aggressively. The way you would if you were checking whether something was there, rather than trying to drive it away. The breathing stopped. Something shifted above him. Not small, not quick. A weight redistributing itself on the platform boards, the wood compressing and releasing in a pattern that spoke of significant mass moving from one position to another. It was not a fast movement. It was the movement of something that was not frightened, that was simply adjusting. He pulled the pole back. He held it against his chest and lay still, and the shelter was completely quiet, and he did not move. He did not look into the loft. He made that decision consciously, at some point in the first hour after he pulled the pole back, and he has thought about it enough since then to be able to explain it clearly. It was not that he was afraid of what he would see, though he was. It was something more specific than that. He had the feeling, and he is careful to call it a feeling, not a certainty, that whatever was up there was aware of him deciding. That the decision not to look was something it could perceive, the way you can perceive another person's attention in a room without seeing them directly. He felt that if he looked, the dynamic would change in a way he could not predict and did not want to find out. So, he did not look. He lay in his sleeping bag with his headlamp on its lowest setting and his trekking pole across his chest, and he listened. The breathing came back after about 10 minutes. It had the quality of something settling again, resuming a rest that had been briefly interrupted. Slow, even, unhurried. He listened to it, and he matched his own breathing to it without meaning to, and then he noticed he was doing that and stopped. Over the next hour, it changed twice. The first change was subtle. The rhythm slowed, deepened, the specific pattern of something moving into a heavier sleep. He found this almost more disturbing than the waking breath, because it implied comfort. It implied that whatever was above him was not threatened by his presence, that it had assessed the situation and found no reason for urgency and gone back to its rest. He lay beneath it and listened to it sleep and could not decide what to do with that information. He said out loud, at some point around 1 a.m, "I'm going to wait until morning." He said it quietly, conversationally, the way you say something to yourself when you need to hear it in the air. He does not know why he said it out loud. He says maybe he needed to commit to it. Maybe he needed whatever was in the loft to know that he had a plan, and the plan did not involve the latter. The breathing slowed again after he spoke. He is certain of that. He lay in the stillness of the shelter, and the only sound was the breathing above him going slower, heavier, and the distant sound of wind through the maples outside. The second change came around 3 a.m, and it was not subtle. He had grown up hunting with his father in the hill country of Pennsylvania. He had spent enough dawns in tree stands and ground blinds to understand the difference between sleeping animals and waking ones, between the stillness of rest and the stillness of attention. It was a knowledge in his body more than his mind, the kind of thing you absorb over years of early mornings in cold woods. He could not have explained it to someone who had not spent time that way, but he knew it the moment he felt it. The breathing above him changed rhythm. It became shallower and more frequent, still through the nose, still controlled, but differently controlled. Not the control of sleep, but the control of alertness. Something that had been resting began paying attention. He did not move. He did not change his breathing or shift his weight or reach for anything. He lay completely still and waited. The weight above him moved. Slowly, incrementally. The boards compressing in a sequence that told him something was repositioning itself on the loft platform. Moving toward the edge. Moving toward the open side of the loft that faced out over the main shelter floor. The side with no railing. The side that was directly above where he lay. He heard the boards compress at the edge. Something had moved to the lip of the loft and stopped there. He got up. He did it in one controlled movement, the kind of thing that is only possible when adrenaline organizes your body before your mind has finished deciding. He had his sleeping bag under his left arm, his pack half closed in his right hand, his boots in the crook of his elbow, unlaced. He did not put the boots on. He picked up his trekking poles from where they were propped against the platform, and he walked toward the shelter entrance, toward the open face and the path beyond it, without using his headlamp. He did not turn the headlamp on until he was 15 feet down the path. He had counted the steps to the entrance from his position on the platform sometime during the night. without knowing why, and he walked them in the dark without stumbling. When he was 15 feet down the path, he turned the headlamp on and pointed it back at the shelter. The loft edge was visible from where he stood, the open lip of the platform above the main sleeping level, lit by the beam at an angle that caught it but did not fully illuminate the space behind it. At the very edge, in that partial light, there was something pale. He cannot describe it with more precision than that. He has tried. He says it was at the edge of the loft. It was pale, and it was the size and general shape of something large enough to fill the space. He did not look at it long enough to be more specific. He turned and walked up the path and did not turn the headlamp back toward the shelter. He hiked 4 miles to the road in unlaced boots. He has done long miles in these mountains and he knows the trail well, but he says those 4 miles were the longest of his life. Not because of the distance, but because of the quality of listening he did during them. Every step of his own, every branch moving in the wind, every sound the forest made as the night moved toward morning. He arrived at the road as the sky was beginning to gray and sat on the tailgate of his car for a while before he could make himself get in. He drove to the nearest town and ate breakfast at a diner, and then went to the ranger station and filed a report. A ranger went out to the shelter that morning and came back with a finding of nothing present. No sign of a person, no evidence of anything unusual. The shelter was clean. The register was as he had left it. The loft held nothing but the old folded tarp and the length of paracord. One thing noted. The ranger mentioned it almost as an aside, in the tone of someone offering a detail without wanting to make too much of it. The loft shelf had fresh gouge marks in the wood that had not been noted in the previous shelter inspection 2 weeks prior. The marks were at the edge of the platform, at the lip he had seen from the path. He asked the ranger to describe them. The ranger said it looked like something with long fingers had gripped the edge of the loft and held it. Then the ranger stopped and said, "Like fingers," as if the word had arrived before he had approved it. He did not use it again. He said possibly animal damage, possibly a raccoon working on the wood. He filed the report as possible animal damage, and that was the official finding. He filed a FOA request for the report 18 months later. He had never done anything like that before. He wanted to see the full language of the ranger's description, the specific words used for the gouge marks. He thought seeing it in writing might help him understand what he was dealing with, give it an official shape he could work with. The report came back with most of it intact. The date, the shelter location, his name as the reporting party, the ranger's name, the summary of findings. The section describing the gouge marks was redacted. Not the whole report, not the findings section as a whole. Just the specific language describing the marks on the loft edge. He called the ranger station and asked about the redaction. He was told it was standard procedure for reports involving potential wildlife activity, that the description had been forwarded to a wildlife biologist for assessment, and was under review and therefore not available for public release. He asked whether the assessment had been completed. He was told they would get back to him. They have not gotten back to him. He does not sleep in open-faced shelters anymore. He carries a tent now on every trip, regardless of the weather or the section or how good the shelter reputation is. He sets it up with the door facing outward, and he zips it fully before he turns his headlamp off. Every night, without exception. He does not describe this as a fear. He says it is a preference. He says it very carefully, in the tone of someone who has rehearsed the phrasing, who knows that preference is the right word for what he wants other people to understand, and not quite the right word for what it actually is. The last account in this collection is different from all the others. It does not begin on the trail. It begins in a diner, in a small Virginia town that sits close enough to the AT that the white blazes are visible from the front window if you know where to look. It comes from a woman who has watched that trail for 40 years and who understands it in a way that most hikers never will, because she has seen not just the trail itself, but what it does to the people who walk through one particular section of it. She has been waiting to tell this story to the right audience for a long time. She did not call it a horror story. She called it a pattern. She said there was a difference, and she believed it mattered, and she wanted to be clear about that distinction before she said anything else. She has run the same diner in the same small Virginia trail town since her early 30s. She is in her mid-60s now. Her father worked trail maintenance on the section near town for 20 years before his knees gave out, and her grandfather worked it before him, back when the trail through that part of Virginia was still being established, and the volunteer crews came out on weekends with hand tools and a general sense that they were doing something that would outlast them. She grew up knowing the AT the way children who grow up near rivers know the river. Not as a destination, not as an experience to have, but as a feature of the landscape that simply is, that has always been there, that has its own logic and its own moods and its own rules, that you learn not from a guidebook but from proximity over time. She knows hikers. That is the thing she says first and means most. She has been feeding them for 4 decades, the northbounders in spring with their Georgia mud still in the seams of their gaiters, and their eyes not yet adjusted to the distance. The southbounders in summer who have come down from Maine with something quieter and more settled in their faces. The section hikers who come through the same week every year and order the same thing and update her on their lives the way people update someone they see regularly but not constantly. She knows the difference between a hard day and a hard section. She knows what dehydration looks like, and what a big mile day looks like, and what it looks like when someone has had an encounter with a bear or a bad ford or a section of trail that was worse than the guidebook suggested. She knows what those look like. That is her point. She has a clear and specific baseline built from 40 years of observation. And against that baseline, the people who come through a particular 3-mile stretch of trail sometimes look different. Not often. Most people come through that section fine, come into the diner the way hikers always come into diners, loud and hungry and smelling of the woods, and full of the particular vitality that comes from spending days doing something physically demanding in beautiful terrain. Most of them are fine, but some of them are not. She describes it carefully, the way a careful person describes something they have thought about for a long time and want to get exactly right. The ones who come through that section and come into the diner different. They are quieter. Not tired quiet, different quiet. They sit facing the door. Not every table in her diner faces the door, but the ones who come in that way find a seat that does, sometimes moving past an open table to get to one with sight lines to the entrance. They order food, but they do not always eat it. They hold their coffee cups with both hands the way people hold things when they need something solid to hold on to. And they do not talk about that section of trail. If you ask them how the trail was, they will tell you about the section before it and the section after it. They will describe a viewpoint, a shelter, a good spring, a difficult climb. They will skip the 3-mile stretch without naming it, without acknowledging the skip, and if you watch them carefully, you can see the moment they realize they have skipped it and decide not to go back to fill it in. The decision is visible if you know what to look for. A small pause, eyes moving to the wall or the window, a slight reorganization of the face, and then they continue with what came after. She tried for years to explain it through ordinary means. She knows that section has a difficult ford that can be tricky in high water. She knows the ridge portion is exposed and can be brutal in bad weather. She knows dehydration and heat exhaustion and general trail misery can change a person's mood and manner in ways that look like something else if you do not know to look for the physical signs. She has asked enough hikers enough careful questions over enough years to satisfy herself that the ford is not the explanation, that the weather and the physical difficulty are not the explanation, that the people who come through looking different are not simply having harder days than the people who come through looking fine. She asked locals. Not in a direct way. She is not a dramatic person, and she did not want to create a story where there might not be one. But over the years, in the natural course of conversation with people who have lived near that trail section for a long time, she has found that the pattern she had noticed was not news to anyone who had been paying attention. Nobody volunteered the information unprompted. But when she raised it carefully, in the right conversation with the right person, she got the same thing every time. A pause. A slight shift in the quality of attention. And then something like, "Yes, there is something about that section." Nobody said more than that. They did not need to. 3 summers ago, a hiker came in before the section, who she remembers specifically. A solo woman, experienced, the kind of thru-hiker who had done this before and knew how to carry herself on the trail and off it. She came in for breakfast, heading north, ordered eggs and toast and a coffee refill twice, talked easily about the trail, had opinions about gear and weather and the relative merits of different shelter designs. The kind of person who made the diner feel more alive when they came in. She tipped well and thanked her by name, though she did not know how she knew her name, and went back out to the trail. She came back 4 hours later. That was the first thing. She should not have been back in 4 hours. The section ahead of her would have taken most of the day, and beyond it there were miles of good trail and a decent shelter that someone with her pace and experience would have pushed for without question. Instead, she came back. She sat down at the counter, not a booth, the counter, close to where she was standing, and she ordered coffee, and she looked at the wall behind the counter for 40 minutes. She refilled the cup once without saying anything. She refilled it again. After the second refill, the hiker looked at her directly and said, "Has anyone ever told you about something that follows on that section?" She looked back at her. "Yes," she said. The hiker nodded. She did not ask what. She did not ask for details or clarification or confirmation of any specific thing. She just nodded. The way you nod when an answer tells you something you already knew but needed to hear from someone else. She left a $20 bill on the counter next to a $6 coffee, and she picked up her pack and she walked back out. She did not go north, she went south, back the way she had come. She's thought about that a lot since. About the question the hiker asked, the phrasing of it. Something that follows. Not something she saw, or something that happened, but something that follows. As if that were the understood and obvious category for the thing she was describing. As if the question were simply confirming a type of experience that had its own name. A name this hiker had arrived at on her own in 4 hours on that section of trail. She does not know what happened to that hiker on the section. She does not know what she heard or what she felt, or what made her turn around instead of continuing north on a thru hike she had been planning for a year. She only knows the question and the way it was asked, and the fact that 40 minutes of staring at a wall preceded it. The diner is still open. The trail still goes through. Most people come back fine. The first time she understood that her grandfather's rules were not superstition was in the summer of 1987. She was 12 years old and working the counter after school, refilling coffee and keeping the pie case stocked and listening to the adults talk the way children listen when adults forget they are there. Her grandfather was sitting at the far end of the counter the way he always sat in the afternoons, nursing a cup he never fully finished, watching the window. A man came in who she had not seen before. Middle-aged, heavy-set, wearing trail clothes that had been on him for several days. He was muddy from the knees down, which she noticed because it had been dry for a week. She could not figure out where the mud had come from. He sat down 2 stools from her grandfather and asked for pie and coffee without looking at the menu. He ate half the pie before he spoke. Then he looked down the counter at her grandfather and said, "You know what's on that section above the hollow?" Her grandfather looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once, a single slow nod, and said, "I know what's there." The man nodded back. He finished his pie. He drank his coffee. He left without saying another word, without asking anything further, without offering what he had experienced or what her grandfather knew. The 2 of them had reached some understanding in those 2 sentences that required nothing more. She cleared the man's plate and refilled her grandfather's cup, and did not ask about it then, because something in the way it had happened told her that asking would be wrong, that it was the kind of exchange that closed itself and did not invite questions from 12-year-olds who happened to be nearby. She asked later. She asked carefully, over several years, in small pieces, the way you ask about things that matter to people who do not talk about them easily. Her grandfather was not a man who withheld information to be dramatic. He withheld it because he thought about what information did to people who received it, about whether knowing a thing helped you or only burdened you. He had watched the trail long enough to have opinions about that. What he told her, piece by piece over those years, were the rules, not explanations. Rules. Do not stop on the ridge portion of that section. Keep moving. If you need to rest, rest after the descent. Do not sit down anywhere on the ridge or in the hollow. Standing is fine. Sitting is not. Do not look back if you hear footsteps behind you on the downhill into the hollow. Walk at your normal pace and do not look back. Do not go into the hollow for any reason after 4 in the afternoon. If you are not through by 4, camp at the north end and go through at first light. Do not respond if something calls your name between the ridge and the creek. Do not answer. Do not say you hear it. Do not indicate in any way that you have heard it. And the last rule, the one he said most simply, it won't follow past the creek. Just walk through. Once you are across the creek, you are done with it. He did not tell her what it was. He did not give it a name. She asked once directly when she was in her 20s and thought she had earned the answer. He looked at her for a moment and said, "I don't know what it is. I know what it does, and I know where it stops, and that's been enough for my purposes." He said that was enough for hers too. She did not ask again. She describes the section now with the precision of someone who has heard it described many times and thought about it even more. The trail comes off a ridge walk that is exposed and long, with views on both sides and good light for most of the day. The kind of section that gets written up in guidebooks as a highlight. Then it drops. The descent is steep and sustained, switchbacking down into a hollow that is narrow and deep, the walls rising on both sides to the point where the light goes gray even at midday. The creek at the bottom is loud enough to fill the whole space with sound, loud enough that you cannot hear your own footsteps clearly once you are close to it, loud enough that anything approaching from behind would be covered by it until it was very close. The trail markers in the hollow are spaced farther apart than they are on the ridge. She noticed this years ago, and her father confirmed it when she asked him. He had maintained that section, and he said the spacing had always been that way, that the records going back to the original trail routing showed the same spacing, that nobody had ever changed it. She believes the spacing is intentional. She believes it was designed to keep hikers moving through the hollow rather than stopping to look for the next blaze. If the blazes come quickly, you glance for them and move on. If they are farther apart, you slow down and search. The hollow is not a place that should be searched. The section takes 90 minutes at a normal pace. Most people do it in 90 minutes or less. But over the years, 3 hikers came into her diner having taken significantly longer. 4 hours, 4.5 hours, once nearly 5, with no injury and no detour and no explanation for the time. All three described the same experience when she asked them carefully about it. They had been walking normally. Then they had become aware that they were stopped, standing still on the ridge, with no memory of stopping and no sense of how long they had been standing there. Not dizzy, not confused in the way of dehydration or heat, not dreaming. Simply stopped, in the middle of the trail, with time missing. All three said the same thing about the quality of it. Not that time had passed quickly, the way time passes when you are absorbed in something. That time had simply not passed at all, and then suddenly it had, and they were standing still in the middle of the trail on a ridge with the light lower than it should have been and no account for the gap. Her father found the anomaly in the registers. He had been maintaining that section through the 1980s and had developed the habit of reviewing shelter registers at both ends of his assigned stretch, the shelter at the north end of the hollow section and the shelter at the south end. In the registers from a 6-year period, beginning in 1982 and ending in 1988, the same trail name appeared at both shelters. Signed in at the north shelter, signed out at the south shelter, with the correct mileage between them logged both times. The trail name was Nobo, which is common enough. It is simply the abbreviation for northbound, the direction most thru-hikers travel, and people choose it as a trail name without much thought. He had assumed it was a thru-hiker using a generic name, someone who had not put much effort into the tradition. He tried to track the hiker at the next hostel north. Nobody had seen a hiker using that name. He tried the trail town south. Nobody there either. The entries continued for 6 years. Same name, same careful handwriting, same correct mileage logged between the two shelters. Always at the north shelter and the south shelter. Never anywhere else on the entire trail. For 6 years, Nobo signed in and signed out of that specific section and appeared nowhere else, as if that 3-mile stretch was the only part of the trail that existed for them, as if the trail on either side of the hollow did not apply. In 1988, the entries stopped. Her father never found an explanation. He had looked at those registers long enough that she had found the old copies in his files after he passed. The register pages he had photocopied and kept in a manila folder, labeled simply with the section name and the years. She still has the folder. The handwriting is clear and consistent across all 6 years, patient and careful, the mileage always exactly right. Her father had written one note in pencil at the bottom of the last copied page. It said, "Asked at both hostels again. No one? Entries stopped October. Will watch next season." There was no note for the next season. By the next season, he had apparently decided there was nothing more to watch for. Or he had decided he did not want to write it down. She kept the folder. She has kept a lot of things her father left. His trail maintenance notes, his seasonal reports, the correspondence with the trail club going back to the 1970s. She kept them because she understood that they were a record of something, even if what they recorded was not always clear. History does not always know what it is while it is happening. Sometimes you keep the files and let the future decide what they mean. The trail still goes through. The hollow is still there. The rules her grandfather gave her are still the rules, passed now to no one in particular, because she has no children and her nephew has no interest in the trail, and there is no obvious recipient for the knowledge. She has thought about that, about what happens to practical knowledge when the people who carry it are gone, whether it gets rediscovered or whether it simply stops existing because no one is left who knows to pass it on. She does not think the hollow cares either way. She had driven past the south trailhead 1,000 times. It was a small gravel pullout on the left side of a county road, easy to miss if you did not know it was there, marked only by a small wooden post with a blaze on it, and a narrow path leading into the trees. She had looked at it from the car window for 40 years without stopping. She had watched hikers pull in and park and shoulder their packs and disappear into the woods, and she had never once felt the urge to follow them. Last October, she finally did. Her nephew was doing a section hike through the area, a long weekend trip, and he had mentioned he would be passing through the hollow section on a Saturday afternoon. She had not planned it in advance. She had been thinking about it for a few days, turning the idea over in the way you turn over something you know you are going to do, but have not yet committed to. And on Saturday morning, she told herself it was practical. She would walk in from the south end, meet him at the creek, walk back out with him to the road. A short trip, an hour in, maybe less, and then out. She had done harder things on harder days. She packed water in an extra layer and her good walking shoes, the ones she wore when she walked the county road in the mornings. She drove to the pullout and parked beside a pickup truck that had a trailhead permit on the dash. She sat in the car for a moment before she got out. She did not do this consciously. She noticed afterward that she had sat there for a few minutes doing nothing, which was not something she normally did, and she did not know what to make of it. The hollow path was steeper than she had imagined from descriptions. She had heard it described many times, but description does not capture gradient the way your legs do, and the first quarter mile was a sustained descent that required attention. The walls rose on either side, first soil and root tangles, then exposed rock face where the hollow narrowed. The stone, dark and damp-looking, even in dry weather. The creek sound came up from below before she could see the water, filling the hollow the way creek sound does in a confined space, amplified by the walls and made into something larger than the creek itself. She noted the light. It was noon. She had specifically chosen noon to give herself the most daylight, and still the light in the hollow was gray and thin, the walls high enough that the sun came in at an angle that barely reached the path. She had not expected that. She had expected something like the ridge above it, open and clear. The hollow was neither. She moved at a steady pace. She was not a hiker, but she was not unfit, and the path was clear enough. She watched the blazes, the white rectangles on the trees, and noted that they were spaced farther apart than she would have expected, long gaps between them that made her scan ahead to find the next one before she felt comfortable moving. She understood then, in a practical way, what she had only understood theoretically before, that the spacing slowed you down, made you look, made you stop and search the trees rather than walking through with your eyes on the path. The hollow did not want you moving through it quickly. The blazes, as they were spaced, made that impossible. She stopped halfway down to drink water. She unscrewed the cap of her bottle, drank, screwed it back on, and started walking again. Behind her, footsteps, rhythmic and close, about 10 feet back, matching her pace with a precision that she noticed immediately because it was precise in a way that echoed where not. She had heard her own footsteps echo before, on bridges, in tunnels, in hollow spaces where sound bounced back at you from the surface ahead. This was not that. An echo comes back at the same time, a mirror of the original. These came a half step after, present and separate and behind her. She told herself the walls. The hollow walls were stone in places, she had seen that, and stone returned sound in ways that were sometimes surprising and counterintuitive. She had heard of acoustic anomalies in terrain like this. She told herself this and kept walking and did not turn around. The footsteps stayed with her. When she moved, they moved. When she reached a section of path that angled slightly, and she naturally adjusted her pace to account for the footing, the footsteps adjusted too, after that same half-step delay. She was a precise observer by nature and by decades of practice. the kind of person who noticed small things and filed them accurately, and she filed this accurately despite not wanting to. An echo does not have a delay. The delay was the information. She stopped. The footsteps stopped. She stood still for 30 seconds, counting internally, her breathing controlled and even. The hollow was loud with creak sound below her and silent in every other register. No birdsong, no wind, just the water and the ringing of her own pulse and the specific absence of the footsteps that had been there a moment ago. Then her name. Not her full name. The shortened version that her family used. That her grandfather had called her. That her father had called her. A two-syllable contraction that she had heard from them all her life and from almost no one outside them. Said once, from uphill above her and to the left, where the hollow wall rose steeply and there was nothing visible but rock face and the roots of the trees growing at the top of it. Said quietly, not echoed. Once. She walked. She did not run. The path was too narrow and too steep for running, and she knew it. Knew that a fall here would mean a twisted ankle at best and something worse at worst, and that neither outcome was acceptable. She walked fast, and she kept her eyes on the path ahead of her, and she kept her breathing even, and she did not answer, and she did not look back, and she did not look up at the hollow wall to her left. She put one foot in front of the other at the fastest pace the terrain would support, and she went down the hollow toward the sound of the creek. The footsteps came back behind her. Faster now, matching her increased pace, still with that half-step delay. She did not change her speed again. She had found the speed the path allowed, and she held it, and she kept moving. And the creek sound grew louder and louder, until it was all she could hear over her own footsteps and the footsteps behind her. She reached the creek bank. Flat stones, cold water running clear and fast, the sound filling her ears completely. She crossed without stopping, stepping from stone to stone, the cold water coming up over the toes of her good walking shoes, and she did not care. She reached the far bank and kept walking up the path on the other side. Behind her, at the creek bank, the footsteps stopped. She heard them stop, or she heard them not continue, which was the same thing. She did not turn to look. She walked up the far bank and onto the path that led to the south trailhead, and she did not look back until she was at the gravel pullout, and her hand was on the door of her car. The path behind her was empty. The hollow was visible from the pullout, the narrow cut in the terrain, the gray light inside it, the sound of the creek coming up from the bottom. Nothing on the path. Nothing at the hollow entrance. Just the trees and the stone walls and the water and the ordinary appearance of an afternoon in October in a Virginia hollow. Her nephew did not come through the hollow that day. He had taken a different approach after a section of trail washed out north of his planned route and had rerouted around it, arriving in town from the north road in a car he had hitched from the next trailhead over. He came into the diner an hour after she did, smelling of trail and pleased with himself for having solved the logistics of the reroute, and he ordered a large meal and told her about his trip. He asked how her morning had been. She said fine. She poured him coffee and brought him his food and watched him eat and thought about what she had heard in the hollow and what had said her name from the wall above the path and how it had known what to call her. She does not know who told it. She does not know how it would know the shortened name, the family name, the name that had never been written on a trail register or spoken to a stranger. She does not know if the footsteps and the voice were the same thing or two different things operating in the same space. She does not know if she crossed the creek at the right moment or if she would have crossed it anyway, regardless of where she was when her nerve held. She knows the footsteps stopped at the bank. Her grandfather said it would not follow past the creek. She does not know if this means the creek is a limit or a border, or simply the point at which whatever is in that hollow decides it has gone far enough. She does not know if the decision is always the same or if it varies, if there are days when it follows further, if there have ever been days when it did not stop. She has not gone back. She has no intention of going back. Her nephew asked her that winter if she wanted to walk a section of trail with him in the spring. Something easy, a day hike on the ridge. She said yes. She made sure the route he chose did not go anywhere near the hollow. He did not notice the detour she had added to the plan. She was careful about how she suggested it. Her nephew asked her, the day he came in from the rerouted hike, how the walk was. She said fine. He accepted this and told her more about his own day, and she listened and refilled his coffee, and when he finally asked if she was all right, because she had been quieter than usual, she said she was just tired. She was tired. That part was true. The interview had been done for a trail magazine that ultimately decided not to run it. The journalist said later that the editor felt it was not the right fit for their readership, which the journalist understood to mean that the editor had read it and found it uncomfortable in a way that did not resolve into anything publishable. The journalist posted the full, unedited transcript on a hiking forum instead, with the woman's permission, with names and specific locations removed. 11 people responded within the first week. Every single one had hiked that section of trail. Every single one said they had not talked about it before. She read the responses over several days. She is not someone who spends time online, and she found the experience disorienting in the way that encountering a large amount of information about something you thought was yours alone can be disorienting. Her nephew read the responses to her in the evenings and summarized them. After the 7th one, she asked him to stop. She said she did not think knowing more accounts would change anything, and she did not want the details of other people's experiences sitting in her memory alongside her own. She had enough in there already, but she had heard the summaries of the first 7, and what they had in common was specific enough to be significant. The footsteps with the half-step delay. Every account that described footsteps described them the same way. Not an echo, not simultaneous, but following, with that particular lag that distinguished a separate sound source from a reflection. 3 of the 7 accounts included footsteps. All 3 used different language to describe the delay, but arrived at the same phenomenon, the voice using personal names. 4 of the 7 accounts included a voice. In every case, the voice used a name that the hiker felt could not have been known by a stranger, a childhood nickname, a name used only within the family, a trail name that the hiker had not used in that section and had not spoken aloud near any other hiker for days. In 3 of those 4 accounts, the voice said only one word, the name. Once. From above the trail, from the hollow wall or the ridge above the descent, the creek as a stopping point. 6 of the 7 accounts that included any form of following described it as stopping at the creek. Not being outrun, not being scared off, stopping. As if the creek were the agreed-upon limit, as if whatever was in the hollow understood the boundary and observed it consistently. The time loss on the ridge. 2 accounts described standing stopped on the ridge with no memory of stopping, time missing. The light lower than it should have been when awareness returned. Nobody had ever seen anything. Not a shape, not a figure, not a partial form in the trees. Every account was entirely auditory. Sound, footsteps, voice, the specific quality of presence communicated through what was heard rather than what was seen. Whatever was in that hollow had never shown itself to anyone who wrote about it afterward. Nobody had ever been physically harmed. Nobody had been touched, pulled, blocked, threatened with anything tangible. Nobody had been followed past the creek. The accounts were unanimous on this point, which she found interesting in a way she could not fully articulate. That something which had been operating in that hollow for as long as anyone could document had never escalated beyond a certain threshold. It called, it followed, it stopped at the water. It had been doing exactly those three things, in that order, for as long as anyone had records of it. She pulled out her father's files after reading the 7 summaries, not looking for anything specific. She had read through them before, when she was organizing his things after he passed, and she knew what was in most of them. But she wanted to look at the section notes again with this new information in mind, to see if anything read differently now. In a folder of miscellaneous correspondence, she found something she had not paid close attention to before. A carbon copy of a letter her father had received from a county surveyor's office in 1986 in response to a query he had sent about historical land records for the hollow section. The surveyor had included a note referencing a 1954 county survey of the area. The survey crew's field notes, the letter said, contained a notation that the crew had been unable to complete work in the hollow section after 3 in the afternoon due to what the notes described as persistent distraction among crew members. The letter went on to say that the crew had ultimately completed the hollow section in a single morning push to avoid the issue, and that the field notes did not further define what was meant by persistent distraction. She called her cousin, who had retired from county surveying 2 years prior. She asked him what persistent distraction meant in the context of field survey notes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said it was the term used when crew members stopped working without an assignable reason and could not explain why when asked. Not a medical event, not a dispute, not equipment failure, simply stopping. Standing still or sitting down or wandering slightly from the work area without purpose and being unable afterward to account for the behavior. She asked if it was common. He said it was not. He said in his 30 years of surveying, he had seen the notation used twice, both times in areas with unusual terrain that he declined to describe further. He said the 1954 crew had been thorough and professional, and he had no reason to doubt their records. She thanked him and ended the call. She found the county map after that in a different folder, a reproduction of a 1930s survey map that her father had acquired at some point for reasons she did not know. The map predated the trail routing through that section by 2 decades. She unfolded it on the diner counter after closing one evening and looked at it under the overhead light, tracing the terrain features she recognized: the ridge, the descent, the creek at the bottom, the hollow itself clearly visible as a depression in the topographic lines. The hollow was labeled. The label was faded, the old typeface worn at the edges, but her nephew enhanced it on his phone when she showed it to him. The digital zoom pulling the letters into legibility. Calling hollow. She looked at that for a long time. The name predated the trail by at least 20 years. Predated any thru-hiker's experience of the place by decades. Someone in the 1930s, mapping terrain, had named the hollow for what it did, had known what it did well enough to put it on a map, had not explained it, had not footnoted it, had simply named it the way you name a thing by its nature and left the name there for anyone who looked closely enough to find. She found the trail club minutes after that, in a box of her father's organizational records going back to the 1950s. The minutes from a routing committee meeting in 1952, when the trail through this section of Virginia was being finalized. Most of the meeting was procedural, the kind of careful organizational language that volunteer committees used in that era. Motions seconded, items tabled, decisions recorded with formal precision. One agenda item read, Creek Hollow Routing. Discussed. Accepted with condition. No shelters within section. No explanation of the discussion. No record of what was said or by whom or what the condition was based on. Just the decision. Accepted, with that one condition attached. There were no shelters in the 3-mile stretch. She had always known this. It was unusual for a section that long. Unusual enough that hikers mentioned it sometimes, noting the gap in the shelter system and planning their miles around it. There had never been a shelter built in the hollow section. The 1952 decision had held for 70 years without being revisited or explained in any document she could find. The people who routed the trail through Calling Hollow in the 1950s had known. They had gone through it anyway, perhaps because the terrain was the best available option, perhaps because the alternative routes were worse for other reasons, perhaps because they believed hikers moving through at a normal pace would be fine, which was mostly true. They had attached one condition that told you everything and nothing at the same time. No shelters. Do not let anyone stop there overnight. She laid the map and the minutes side by side on the counter and looked at them together. A 1930s name. A 1952 decision. A 1954 survey notation. 40 years of her own observation. 11 accounts from strangers who had never spoken about it before. All of it pointing at the same 3 miles of trail, at the same hollow, at the same behavior, at the same creek that marked the end of it. She folded the map carefully and put it back in the folder. She put the folder in the box with the rest of her father's files and put the box back on the shelf in the back room where she kept things that mattered. Her nephew asked her that night, when he stopped in after his shift at the hardware store, what she had been doing with all the old papers. She said organizing. He accepted this. He made himself a cup of coffee from the pot she kept going after closing, and sat at the counter and talked about his week, and she listened and answered, and was glad he was there. She did not tell him what the map said. She did not tell him what the Trail Club minutes said. She did not tell him about the 1954 survey notation, or what her cousin had said about persistent distraction, or the 6-year register anomaly her father had documented, or the 11 accounts from people who had not spoken about it before. She did not tell him because she did not know what telling him would do. Information does something to people. Her grandfather had known that and had been careful about it. She was trying to be equally careful, though she was less certain than he had been about where the line was between knowing enough and knowing too much. The hollow had a name before the trail went through it. The trail went through it anyway. It was still going through it. That was what she kept coming back to. Not the history of it, not the accumulated accounts, not the map or the minutes or the survey notation. Just the simple fact that the trail was still open, that it went through Calling Hollow every day, that the guidebooks described it as a standard moderate section with good views on the ridge and a reliable creek at the bottom, and that none of that description was wrong. The journalist asked one final question before she ended the interview. It was the question the journalist said she had been working up to for the full 2 hours of the conversation. The one she had written at the top of her notes before they started and circled twice and debated asking at all. She asked it because she felt the account required it, because everything that had been said before it pointed toward it, because not asking it would have been a kind of dishonesty. She asked whether anything had changed about the hollow in recent years. The woman at the counter was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who does not know the answer. The quiet of someone deciding how to say it. She said yes. Something had changed. She said the accounts from the last 5 years were different from the accounts she had been hearing for the previous 35. Not different in kind. The footsteps were still the footsteps. The voice was still the voice. The creek was still where it stopped. The pattern was the same. But the accounts from the last 5 years described the voice as louder, not closer, louder. She was specific about this distinction because she had thought about it carefully. Closer would mean it was moving toward people, reducing the distance, changing its behavior in a way that might imply escalation of approach. That was not what people were describing. The distance seemed the same, from above, from the hollow wall, from the ridge, but the volume had increased. People who had hiked that section recently and come into the diner were describing a voice they could not pretend was wind, could not rationalize as ambient sound, could not explain as anything other than what it was. In the earlier accounts, the voice was easy to doubt. People doubted it. They questioned their own hearing, their own perception, the tricks that isolation and exertion and the acoustic properties of a hollow could play on a person. The recent accounts did not describe doubt. They described certainty, as if whatever was in that hollow was less concerned than it used to be about being quiet. She did not say that as a dramatic conclusion. She said it in the same measured, observational tone she had used for the entire interview, as a factual description of what the data she had collected suggested. She was a careful woman, and she did not overstate things. She simply said that in her assessment, based on 40 years of the same observation in the same place, something had changed in the last 5 years, and the change was in the direction of less restraint. The journalist asked what she thought that meant. She said she did not know. She said she was not sure knowing would help. The section is still open. It is maintained on the same schedule as the rest of the trail in that district. Blowdowns cleared, blazes repainted when they fade, the creek ford assessed after heavy rain. The trail club's records for that section show no unusual maintenance issues, no damage reports beyond the ordinary, no incidents logged. It appears in every current guidebook that covers that stretch of Virginia Trail as a standard section. Moderate difficulty, good ridge views, reliable water at the creek. The mileage is accurate. The description of the terrain is accurate. There is no note in any official document suggesting the section is anything other than what it appears to be. There are no warning signs. There has never been a closure. People hike through it every day in the hiking season, most of them moving at a normal pace, most of them coming out the other side and continuing north or south without incident. Most of them come into the diner fine, if they come into the diner at all, and order their food and charge their phones and talk about the ridge view and move on. She does not give hiking advice about that section anymore. She used to, in the way a person who has lived next to a trail for 40 years accumulates advice worth giving. The best time of day to do the ridge for the light, the water level to watch for at the ford, the pace that makes the hollow feel manageable. She gave that advice for years, freely, to anyone who asked. She stopped. She does not remember exactly when. It was gradual. The way changes are gradual when they come from something you are still understanding. She started leaving that section out of what she said, and eventually leaving it out became the habit. And now, when someone asks her about the trail ahead, she talks about the hostile options, and the water sources, and the resupply situation, and the next section's character, and she does not mention the hollow. She says this is the only honest thing she can do, because she does not know how to warn someone in a way that would work. She has thought about this carefully, the same way she thinks about everything carefully, and she has concluded that there is no phrasing for the warning that would cause a hiker to reroute rather than to continue. If she said there is something in that hollow that will follow you and call your name, they would nod politely and go anyway, because hikers go anyway. That is the nature of hikers. That is the nature of most people who have not yet experienced the thing they are being warned about. The warning her grandfather gave her was useful because it was specific and practical, and told you exactly what to do rather than what to fear. Do not answer, just walk through. It will not follow past the creek. That was a warning you could act on. She does not have anything better to offer, and she is not sure the creek boundary still holds the way it held when her grandfather learned it. Not with the voice getting louder. Not with the recent accounts describing a certainty that the older ones did not. She does not say this to the journalist. She does not say it to anyone. It is the part of what she knows that she has decided to keep, because some information does not help people, and she is her grandfather's granddaughter, and she learned from him that knowing where to stop is its own kind of wisdom. The diner is still there. She is still there. The window behind the counter still looks out toward the county road and the gravel pullout at the south trailhead, the small wooden post with the blaze on it, the narrow path that goes into the trees and down into the hollow and does not come back out on this side. Last summer, a northbound hiker came in after the section on a Tuesday afternoon in July. She had not seen him before, a solo man, somewhere in his 40s, the look of someone who had been on trail long enough for it to have settled into him, the particular ease in the body that comes from weeks of the same daily routine. He sat down at the counter and ordered coffee and looked at the wall behind the counter. She poured the coffee. She did not ask how the trail was. He sat with the cup for a while. She refilled it when it was half empty without being asked, and he nodded his thanks without speaking. She went about the work of the quiet afternoon, the restocking and the wiping down and the small tasks that fill the time between the lunch rush and the dinner hour. After 30 minutes, he looked at her directly. "Does it always sound that close?" he said. She looked back at him. She had heard the question before in different forms from different people over many years. She knew what it was asking. "Usually," she said. He nodded. He put a $20 bill on the counter beside a cup of coffee that had cost him $3.50, and he picked up his pack from the stool beside him and he walked out. She watched him through the window. He turned north on the county road, back toward the trail, back toward the white blaze on the telephone pole at the edge of town where the road walk ended and the woods began. He did not look back at the diner. She did not ask what he had heard. She never asked. The question was always the same anyway, always some version of "does it always?" Always the same note of something between disbelief and a terrible confirmation. She knew the answer was yes, and she gave the same answer every time, and she did not elaborate because elaboration would not help. She does not know what it is. She has been watching it for 40 years and she does not know what it is. She knows what it does. She knows where it stops, or where it used to stop, or where it has stopped consistently enough that stopping there has come to seem like a rule. She knows it has a name on a map that predates anyone currently alive. She knows the people who routed the trail through it made one condition and kept it quietly for 70 years. She knows the voice is louder than it was. She knows hikers will keep going through because the trail goes through, and hikers follow the trail, and the guidebook describes it as moderate with good views, and there is no warning posted, and there has never been a closure and most people come through fine. She refilled the coffee cup he had left and poured it down the drain and washed the cup and set it in the rack to dry. She looked out the window at the county road, at the gravel pullout, at the post with the blaze on it, at the narrow path going into the trees. She is not afraid anymore. She decided some time ago that fear was not the right response to something you cannot change and cannot explain and can only observe. She is paying attention instead. She has always been good at that. The trail goes through. The hollow is still there. She will be at the counter tomorrow when the door opens.